to Commander Central episode 132, and this week we'll be looking at Cable Beck's deck, Gyrus Chomper of Faces. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
This is our second show of GP Vegas week. Pardon me, Magic Fest Vegas week.
Haha.
With 3 more to come. It's not like we're not busy enough this week being in Vegas for the entire time and for 4 days of Magic Fest and playing so much EDH, our eyes are going to bleed. We decided to also do 5 shows.
You know what? I mean, luckily, with the power of technology and time travel, we're actually recording this back in, July.
Yeah. We figured we probably should, get a calendar out and start planning some of this stuff out. Because it's one thing if you're doing one show a week. You can, okay, we'll record this show on, Thursday, and it'll air on Monday. And then next week, we'll record one on Thursday and air it on Monday. That's a pretty simple schedule to keep track of. Once you add in 2 shows a week, and then you're like, okay, we had to record twice and get them edited and air them twice. That's challenging enough. But when you're planning on airing 5 in a week and you're not doing them in any kind of a sequence, you're like, okay, we're going to record this one that's going to air on Tuesday on this date and this one that'll air on Wednesday on this date, then it becomes a whole Ouroboros of just calendar nonsense trying to keep track of. So we had to actually get out the Google Calendar and plan all of this out like professionals.
Yeah, we did. But I can say this much, Dana. Like how I will be at Vegas when this airs, I'm on my 3rd beer already.
All right, excellent. Well, this will be airing on Tuesday. It is a Tuesday right now, so we will already have been in town, and who knows what will already have happened. I'm assuming we're still alive and not currently in lockup, but, it's Vegas. Anything can happen.
Just don't throw your mattress out the window.
Right, exactly. That's the lesson. So we're taking a look at Cable Beck's Gyrus deck, Chomper of Faces. And as always, Max sent some notes off, and we got some responses back here that we can read back to you guys to know what we're dealing with. He says, meta is very variable. Almost everyone has multiple decks that range from goofy jank to moderately powerful, and you can see both of those played by the same person in the same night. This deck is a little more middle of the pack, leaning towards less powerful just because it's fun to do big splashy turns that require some setup.
Yeah, so he says the deck is mostly designed to be a toolbox deck. He likes putting creatures into the graveyard and pulling them out with Gyrus at the most opportune times to get maximum utility. He typically wins through combat damage, my favorite way to win.
Yeah.
But it could be any number of ways. I have a few creatures out and bring in God Eternal Ronus from the graveyard to pump everything. Or I could have a bunch of insect tokens from Hornet Queen that I pump up with Gigantomancer. Overall, the deck just has a bunch of intermingling synergies that make it hard for people to predict or how to react to. This can also make it difficult to get the pieces that really make everything come together all out at the same time.
That he's not afraid to let his commander die because usually he has more mana and it just comes back bigger, allowing him to bring back bigger things and smash even harder.
He said, honestly, the deck probably struggles the most with just doing something to take advantage of whatever board states could be in front of him at the time and figuring out a way to win. He said he has a budget. He'd like to keep the budget around $200 for all changes, but we can maybe convince him to go over for the right cards. And
just looking at the basic deck where it stands right now, there's a 3.9 average CMC. It's really heavily into the 4 drops, followed by 3 drops. So that's higher than I would like, generally speaking. Yes, this is doing some reanimation stuff, so you're not necessarily hard casting all of that, but that can be pretty difficult sometimes to deal with. So the first thing we always kind of look at here, Max, and I think we'll do it again, is the land base, because that is what makes everything else in the deck work. And the smoother you can make your land base work, the smoother the rest of the deck functions. So there's nothing terribly out of place or surprising here. We do have 21 basics in a 3-color deck, which is a really safe amount. It's such a safe amount that it's probably more than I would run. It can be argued that I don't run enough basics. I think my 3-color Kresh deck right now is at 9 basic lands, and that's probably not enough, and I fully recognize that. But as we've said here before, if you don't get punished frequently for running that many basics, maybe you can get away with it and try to have the kind of semi-perfect mana base. I really don't know if he gets punished for. I would guess not, based on the power level of this deck. I feel like he probably doesn't see Blood Moon or Back to Basics or Ruination kind of cards that much, but I guess I'm not entirely sure. Looking at the base, what do you think of it, Max?
Yeah, I think it's very conservative. A lot of basics. Maybe his meta does see Back to Basics, Blood Moon,
Sure.
all that fun stuff, so it makes sense. At the same time, even if you run into those type of things, you're in Jund. You can deal with almost anything.
You have removal.
I think, you could really pull those basics back to maybe like the 15 range and put in a lot more dual lands or utility lands into this deck.
I think you could as well. So we'll start with, one of the cards we almost always recommend to people is Scavenger Grounds.
Trash card.
Yeah. You're trying to get people to buy Chris's shirt.
Well, I have to help him if he's not here.
That is a fair point. I get not maybe running Scavenger Grounds in this kind of deck where your graveyard is so valuable. I have a few graveyard decks or decks that care about it at least a little bit, and I still run it because I feel like as an emergency, oh my God button to hit, it's still sometimes worth losing your graveyard if the alternative is a Rise of the Dark Realms or something. However, I get how someone maybe would just think theirs is too valuable. However, Bojuka Bog still doesn't hit yours, it hits somebody else's. There's, it costs you a mana one turn because it comes into play tap. Basically, that's the cost. It's a 1 mana use thing to, sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it just wrecks somebody's graveyard. So I feel like if you're not going to run Scavenger Grounds and there isn't a ton of graveyard hate for other people in this deck, I'd find a slot for Bojuka Bog. The downside is minimal, and there are times when the upside is backbreaking for somebody.
Very, very true statements. I've seen you be on both ends of that statement.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I mean, that feels bad when you've just okay, I've got big plans and extra, I'm going to do this, this, and this with my graveyard, and someone's just like, Bojuka Bog, and I'm going to hit you because you're the most stuff, and you're like, son of a... And there's times when you play it on turn 1 and it doesn't do anything, but that oftentimes also doesn't hurt you. So it's a card I would run if you don't want to run Scavenger Grounds. Anything else here that jumps out at you?
Yeah, a few things. We could make the obvious includes of the Battle Bond lands, or the one Battle Bond land. He could run 2, the green-black,
Yes.
The green-red, and the red-black. The Battle for Zendikar fetchable lands aren't in here. But there's a couple that I kind of have an issue with overall in this deck. And the biggest one being Grim Backwoods. Grim Backwoods comes into play untapped. It produces a colorless mana. But for 2 and a black and a green, you can sacrifice a creature to draw a card.
So with Grim Backwoods itself being required to tap, it's a fundamentally 5 mana.
Yeah, to draw a single card. You're in Jund. Again, you can kind of do a lot of stuff. A Phyrexian Arena does the same thing for less mana every turn. You don't have to lose a body. You could just run those high floor cards like Read the Bones or Night's Whisper.
If you need a sack out on a land, High Market will do it at no cost to you.
Right.
You don't draw a card, but if the sack outlet's what's most important, it's beats sinking, you're sinking 1 mana, essentially tapping the High Market versus sinking in 5.
Yeah, I definitely think High Market is way better for that type of effect, especially because the tokens exile themselves at the end of combat, so you want to be able to maybe, if you bring something back with Gyrus that has a death trigger and an enter the battlefield trigger, you want to get both of them, so you want to be able to get rid of that token before combat's over.
And, Phyrexian Tower, after the reprint in...
Ultimate Masters,
Illume, is under $10 or close to $10, at least as of this recording. Maybe it'll be up to 12 when it airs, who knows. But that's also very affordable compared to where it once was. And again, doesn't cost you anything and generates mana that's, can be pretty useful.
Yep.
So if I wanted just a sack outlet, and I don't think it's worth it as a draw outlet, I think it's too much of an investment most of the time. It's mostly a sack outlet with a little bit of upside. I would have tried to have it be a cheap sack outlet.
A card that I'm kind of surprised that isn't in this deck is Kessig Wolfrun.
It's a win condition.
It is a win condition. It is, it taps for a colorless. or you can pay X, red, and a green to give a target creature plus X plus O and trample. Well, here's the fun thing. If your Gyrus is, a 15/15, you just have to pay the red and the green. You don't have to pump it even more. You can just give it trample.
Yep. But pumping it's great too.
Oh, yeah.
Because Gyrus doesn't have trample natively, so the ability to spend 2 mana on a land to do that is really, really useful. No, that's a good one. That's a really good inclusion here. I think, we've mentioned this, I think, in the past, but I'll say it again. If you're somebody who goes to your card shop every week for EDH night and you buy a couple packs, buying packs is fun, and I've done it my fair share of times, but in 6 months, when you look back at the $10 you spent every single week buying a couple packs at your shop on EDH night, how often do you have any real solid return on that money spent? Not that often. Conversely, what you could do every single time you leave the shop is spend $10 on a land for your deck. And after that 6 months is done and you've suddenly replaced all of those, there's no ETB life gain lands here or guild gates or something, but you could very easily throw in the Horizon, the Horizon lands from Modern Horizons. Or the Battle Bond lands or something to round out this deck. Those would really strengthen this deck up, and you don't need to buy them all at once. If you just once a week that's what your purchase at the card shop is when you're in there playing, and add 1 to a deck and do it again next week and do it a month after that, and suddenly 6 months later the same amount of money you would have spent on packs you spent on buffing your mana base. I almost guarantee that will feel like a better investment that feels way more impactful than buying those packs and hoping you hit the lottery.
But packs are so much fun.
They are.
No,
they absolutely are. I will not argue with that. I love cracking a pack.
No, I 100% agree with you. I mean, I love cracking a new pack of Modern Horizons. They're the most recent Masters or supplemental set, but if you know the cards you need, just buy the cards you need. If you have a regular LGS, they make so much more margin on that individual single.
Yep.
Than they are off that pack they just sold you for $9.99.
It's a win-win for everybody. You get the exact card you want and make your deck better. They make better margins. Everybody's happy. And the land base is just the best way to do it. A smooth, silky, flowing mana base that keeps everything else in your deck working makes such a huge difference. So that's our whole mana base spiel there. Look into doing that if you're someone in that position. If you can afford to spend your $5 or $10 a week that you spend on packs, do it in that way. You will enjoy the results way, way more long term. So after the lands, Max, and there's a couple more it's a 3-color deck. I feel like I almost always want, City of Brass. I almost always want Mana Confluence. There is an Exotic Orchard in the deck, which is a card I like a lot. In 3-color decks, it's almost always just an ETB untapped dual land, and really, really often it's a command tower. There's just almost, worst case scenario, it's a basic almost, There's just no downside to it and has a ton of upside. But that's in here. That's a card I'm a fan of. So yeah, I think in a 3-color deck, you can afford to diversify a little bit, and this would be a deck where I would do it. What should we look at next?
How about we start with the instants, because there's only 4 of them.
Easy peasy, we can do that. There's 4 of them. There's Assassin's Trophy, there's Death Sprout, there's Grapple with the Past, and there's Grisly Salvage. So 2 removal spells. Assassin's Trophy is pretty boss. Death Sprout, I like, but don't love. I think it depends on the deck. The art is amazing. Seb McKinnon, as always, home run. What do you think of Death Sprout?
Okay, so it's 4 mana, 1 black, green to destroy target creature, and then you get a basic land card and put it on the battlefield tap. I like the upside. 4 mana to destroy a creature seems expensive when you have cards like Vraska's Contempt that exile it and gain you life at instant speed. Beast Within is 3 mana. It destroys anything. I think I would rather just run a lower costed, for lack of better word, staple than this.
There's a limited amount of removal spells in this deck, so I think you want them to be as versatile as possible. The ramp on Death Threat is useful, but I feel like Beast Within being able to solve any problem, or even Chaos Warp being able to solve any problem, is worth sacrificing that ramp and knowing that you can hit an enchantment if you need to, or hit an artifact if you need to, or hit a planeswalker if you need to.
Yeah, even Chaos Warp, risking that they're going to either get the same thing they got back after the shuffle is so minimal.
Yes.
And especially if you're playing against more of a spell slinger deck and you get rid of that, Swarm Intelligence or, Aria of Flame, there's a good chance they're hitting a non-permanent card if they're a spell slinger type deck.
Yeah. And, I'm running Death Sprout in my Kresh deck. Number one, Kresh cares about stuff dying, so it's actually kind of a bad ramp spell that I treat as something that also buffs Kresh and removes a creature. I think the synergy there is worthwhile. But I'm also running Assassin's Trophy, and I'm also running Beast Within, and I'm also running Maelstrom Pulse, and I'm also running Chaos Warp. Like, I'm running a ton of other, like, it's not my only removal spell. And I think if, in this case where you have a limited amount of removal, you want it to be premium. And I don't think Death Sprout is premium.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there.
Grapple with the Past and Grizzly Salvage are both cards that I don't think are particularly good in a bubble, but the fact that it lets you sculpt basically turn your library top 4 or 5 cards into what you want in your graveyard and put something into your hand that you need, I think is really, really useful in this kind of deck.
Yeah, I really like both of these cards.
Yeah.
It feeds his graveyard while returning something that maybe you want to not have to lose because of Gyrus. Maybe you just want to return that, Eternal Witness to your hand versus making exiling it and making a token of it. I
mean, Grizzly Salvage, 2 mana, instant speed, top 5 cards. Hey, there's my land drop for next turn, and now I'm putting this Combustible Gear Hulk in the graveyard that I'll reanimate next turn. Like, the synergy there in this particular deck is really, really good. Same thing with Grapple in the Path. It only digs 3 deep, but it's the same thing. It grabs that land for your next land drop. It's instant speed, and it puts something, hopefully, in your graveyard to reanimate next turn. It's all good.
Yeah.
How about artifacts next, since we're talking about categories that only have a few cards in them? There's only 5 in the artifact category. There's Gruul's Signet, there's Rakdos Signet, there's Talisman of Resilience, which is the new Golgari Talisman. There's a Soul Ring, and there's a Panharmonicon.
Interesting. Let's talk about the Signets, because of late, and by the time this airs, it's going to be almost a month old, There's been a lot of discussion about Signets versus Talismans now that the Talismans are completed.
Yes.
In my opinion, I think I'm starting to be swayed to the side of Talismans over Signets. Mainly because if your turn 2 play is a Signet, but you have something else you want to do, or let's say you have we're not in the right colors for this specific deck, but let's say you play that Azorius Signet and you have a Path to Exile in your hand, you can't cast that on turn until your next turn because you've tapped out for that Signet.
Yes.
These Talismans let you, at the cost of a life, cast that removal spell. Cast that tutor. So in my opinion, I would look into swapping the Signets out for the other 2 Talismans.
I would agree with that. So I think if you are going to keep the 3 mana-producing artifacts, obviously Soul Ring probably stays. If you're going to keep the 3, I would indeed swap the 2 existing Signets for the Talismans. I think if you are forced to choose between the 2, I think the Talismans are, generally speaking, a little bit better. You can afford to pay life here and there, and I think, surprisingly, once it gets to like turn 5 or 6, very often, you're just using them as colorless mana rocks, too. Assuming you have a decent land base because you've been, not buying packs, and you've been picking up good lands from your shop. They wind up not hurting you as much as people seem to think they do. So I agree with that. I do think, however, and this is one of those things we've discussed in the past, and I'll say it again about the best practices versus the not best practice if you don't get punished for it. The best practice is to keep a nice mix in terms of ramp. You want some land ramp, you want some artifact ramp, you want some whatever. So one person single sweeper, so an Armageddon doesn't kill all your ramp, or a Vandal Blast doesn't kill all your ramp. It's good to have a nice mix so you're not vulnerable to one particular spell. However, if you don't ever see that Armageddon or you don't ever see, something along those lines, why not abuse that a little bit? And I feel like there's no Nature's Lore in this deck. I would much rather have a Nature's Lore to go get me one of my dual lands into play untapped than I would a Signet or a Talisman. So that's one thing I would maybe consider doing here. And, going back to the lands, even something like Into the North that goes and gets you a snowland. We just had a bunch of snowlands reprinted in Horizons and they're full art, but that knocked down the price of the non-full art ones. So like you can pick up very easily, snowlands for 40 to 50 cents. You could very easily replace these with just snowlands just solely for the purpose of running Into the North as a 2-mana fetch to go grab another land. And again, it's a much safer way to ramp as long as you don't see Armageddons. So I would definitely probably get a Nature's Lore in there as a sorcery to replace one of the rocks, but I agree with what you're saying. If I had to choose, I would choose Talismans over the Signets.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Before we move on, I just want to throw this disclaimer out there. Any prices we may mention in this show, by the time you hear it, are almost a month old. So YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, please be nice to us because we are recording this well in advance because we will be at Magic Fest Vegas.
Also, I could just be a dummy and think that Cabal Coffers is still $30 when it's like $50 because that just happened like a month ago or something.
You're my best friend, so I'm not going to call you a dummy on the air. I'll just do it to your face tomorrow at the shop.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So yeah, we might get some of those prices wrong as well. But I just looked actually for the purposes of this show, at least as of when we're recording this, Chromatic Lantern is still under $10. I think it was closer to $8.
I drafted it for like $7.
There you go. So the fact that Chromatic Lantern is a rock that then fixes every one of your colors and just makes it so you just don't care. You're like, I have all the mana in the world. It doesn't matter. I think in a 3-color deck is probably worth it.
Oh, for sure.
So I would consider if I was between the 2 Signets and the Talisman, I would strongly consider, going Nature's Lore and Chromatic Lantern and, I don't even know what else. Maybe the Into the North too, who knows. But I would consider that and then just have Panharmonicon and Sol Ring as my remaining, and Chromatic Lantern as my 3 rocks.
Yep. This is where I actually have a substitution for Grim Backwoods.
Okay.
I would actually slot Altar of Dementia into this deck or Ashnod's Altar or any of the altars. But
sure.
Specifically Altar of Dementia because
you can mill yourself.
You can either mill yourself, which stockpiles your graveyard, but then again, as we get through this deck more, there isn't a lot of reanimation spells in this deck.
Right.
Besides Gyrus, if this was a true, Entomb and all those fun spells, Living Death, then yeah, Alter Dementia for sure. But, the way, if this is a toolbox deck, or even if we kind of suggest changing it into more of a big beater, ETB, value town, train type deck, when you sack that token, it has it's power, right?
Yeah.
When you sack that token, that's a 6/6, you can start milling an opponent out, 6 damage at a time.
Right. It gives you a backup plan in addition to also feeding your strategy.
Right. So you can do it both ways. Like you said, you could mill yourself, hey, I'm going to sack this token of acidic slime and mill myself for 2, and then I'm going to sack this token of combustible Gear Hulk for 6 and hit you for 6, and because you just used your Sensei's Divining Top and have no way to get it back off the top of your deck until then.
Yeah. That makes sense. I also just drafted Altar of Dementia tonight, Max.
And that's kind of why I wrote it down.
Nice. All right. So since we're talking about categories with a finite amount of cards, let's look at the Planeswalkers real quick because there's only one in this deck.
Domri, Chaos Bringer.
Yep. What do you think of Domri here?
So this deck has, 30 plus creatures in it?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that is what this card is being used for. So it's +1, says add red or green mana. If to your mana pool, if that mana is spent on a creature spell, it gains Riot, and Riot is it either enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter, or it enters and has haste. His -3, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal 2 creature cards from among them and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then his -8 says you get an emblem with, at the beginning of each end step, create a 4/4 red and green beast creature token with trample. So I don't think this is ever going to hit the alt range.
I would guess it does not as well.
Adding the mana is cool. You can maybe give Gyrus haste. You can give one of the 30 plus creatures in this deck haste, or make it bigger. You know, I bet Gyrus, you put that +1/+1 counter on it. But I really think the sweet spot is that -3 to look at your top 4 and pick 2 cards and put them into your hand if they're creatures.
Yeah.
My one hesitancy would be that, what if you hit 4 creatures? And what if I want these 2 in my hand, but I'd really like these 2 in my graveyard?
Right.
It's a win-lose situation, I guess.
Yeah.
I think I would just rather not run a Planeswalker.
I kind of tend to agree. I think the haste is also pretty useful here as well. But I don't know. I feel like if that was the big selling point, if you like were concerned about haste, I would rather just have like maybe Rhythm of the Wild in play because the counters also interact with Gyrus, or just have one of the lands that give haste, whether it's Flamekin Village or it's Henweir.
Battlements,
I believe, yeah. Just have one of those things in play.
Garrison? One of the Henweirs.
One of the Henweirs.
The land.
Like, yeah. Or even Hall of Bandit Lord. Like, I think in this deck, probably I would run the first 2 rather than that one, but I think there are ways to give you haste that are better than Domri. I just don't think he does enough things that are impactful necessarily.
No, and this deck does have actually quite a few haste enablers already in it.
Yeah, there's already quite a bit of stuff that does it.
Rhythm of the Wild, you already mentioned. There's an Anger. There's a War... okay, maybe there's only like 2 or 3. But still, that's besides the point. I think almost if you want to do a Planeswalker for Planeswalker swap, Xenagos the Reveler might be worthwhile in this deck. It's a very creature-heavy deck.
It is.
His +1 makes X mana in any combination of red or green equal to the number of creatures you control. Well, that seems really good.
Yeah.
His 0 creates a body, and then his -6 lets you exile the top 7 cards of your library. You may put any number of creature and or land cards from them onto the battlefield. So that is just a big explosive boom. Here's 3 or 4 creatures and a land.
Yep. How about the enchantments? There are 6 of them here.
That there are. So we have Death's Presence, which is a kind of an obscure enchantment. It's 5 and a green. Whenever a creature you control dies, put X +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the power of the creature that died. So I'm going to stop here.
Okay.
This is where I think the sacrifice outlets really need to be more prevalent in this deck. Because let's say you swing with Gyrus and whatever you just reanimated, and we're just going to randomly pick Combustible Gearhulk because I've been using it all night. So you're going to reanimate Combustible Gearhulk and you're going to get that trigger. You do its thing. Okay. You hit with both of them. Or you hit, before damage is declared, you can sacrifice that Gearhulk, put the counters onto Gyrus because the token died, it didn't get exiled, and then damage happens, and now you just added 6 more power to Gyrus that maybe wasn't blocked.
Right.
So I think if you're going to run Death's Presence, you need more sacrifice outlets that are more of a permanent versus spell-based.
So I think there's a version of this deck where Death's Presence makes sense, where you're running Phyrexian Tower and you're running High Market, in addition to maybe even you still keep Grim Backwoods to have just one more. And, in addition to Greater Good, you also have, Vampiric Rites, and you also have Birthing Pod, and you also have, Ashes Altar and Phyrexian Altar.
And Evolutionary Leap, and...
There's a deck that has those things, so when you make those Gyrus tokens and sack them with one of your sack outlets that's almost always in play, then I think Death's Presence does a big gross thing. But as the deck is configured right now, I don't think there's enough sack outlets. I think you're 100% correct. There's not enough sack outlets, I don't think, to make Death's Presence a good card, particularly since it's a 6-mana card.
Yeah, I agree.
So that makes we're both on the same page there.
There we are. Okay, back to the enchantments.
Yes, and I think, if I was going to replace Death's Presence because there isn't enough sack outlets, I would maybe actually throw a sack outlet in. I think Vampiric Rites wouldn't be bad here because it does draw you a card. It's basically turning that creature that's going to die into a draw and a life for, I think it's 2 mana. Is it a black and a colorless, I believe?
I am looking right now. It is, a colorless and a black.
Yeah, or even like throw a...
Viscera Seer, because that's a free sacrifice, but you get to scry.
Yeah, or Momentous Fall, so you can turn that creature into a decent draw spell. Or Life's Legacy, which is a sorcery, to also draw off it for, it's 2 mana, it's a 1 use, but instead of drawing 1 card with Vampiric Rites, you're going to draw whatever the creature's power and toughness is.
Yeah.
So if you've reanimated that, duplicant or something, and it's copied something when it came into play, and it's a 5/5, or you've reanimated that, I don't even know what, I go off the top of my head, Ilharg or something, and or made the token, I should say, not reanimate, and you sacrifice that to Life's Legacy or sacrifice it to Momentous Fall or what have you, and you draw 6 cards versus less. So, yeah, I think I would look at a sack out. Maybe Life's Legacy isn't the best one because it's sorcery speed and the tokens go away at the end of combat, but definitely Vampiric Rites or Birthing Pot sorcery speed too. But what's the green one you mentioned? Evolutionary Leap?
Evolutionary Leap, yep.
Yeah, any of those, I think, that give you a way to take advantage of those tokens. I just think you need enough of those to use Death's Presence, and there aren't enough right now. Greater Good, however.
Love it.
This is a perfect deck for Greater Good.
Yep. Sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to its power, and then discard 3 cards. So you sacrifice that Combustible Gearhulk token, you draw 6, discard 3, even the 3 that you might already have in your hand.
Right. I mean, the math on Greater Good is usually, I'm going to regularly have 7 or 8 power creatures in play, so absolutely I will sack it to net 4 cards. That's just good math. In this case, the cards you discard are actually advantageous as well. You're like, I'm going to draw 8 cards, and hey, I'm going to pitch that Master of Cruelties that I'm going to make a token with next time I attack. Like there's a lot of synergy in a card that's already good even without that synergy.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Paralyze just makes you another copy of that token. That's really good. Path of Discovery is a card I like, although I think it's maybe better in a token deck than it is here. But I guess you do make tokens, and this deck has a ton of creatures, so I think it's good enough here.
I agree with the terminology. It's good enough. I think it fills a spot where you're either gonna put something into your yard that you want for later.
Yep.
You're going to get that land out of the way and put it into your hand. Or you're going to make that token you just made 1 power bigger, or you're going to make Gyrus 1 power bigger, or, something like that.
The real beauty of Path in this deck is it's an ETB, not a cast. So it does get the trigger off the Gyrus tokens when they come into play. I think it's a solid card. If you told me that it wasn't quite good enough, I would believe you, but I also think it probably does pretty decent work here.
Now I'm looking to see if anybody's drafted it in the Vegas draft. And I should know this because we're technically at Vegas.
Because you have the perfect deck for it. Well, while you're looking that up, the last card here is Warstorm Surge. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So, number 1, Gyrus being recast multiple times coming into play, that's going to dome somebody. It also is going to deal damage off the creature tokens when they come into play. 6 mana is a lot, though.
It is a lot. It's one of those cards where you slam it, and you need to be able to do something else that turn.
Here's what I bet happens with this card. I bet he draws Warstorm Surge, and there's those games where you're like, this card is dead right now. I have no board presence. I don't want to spend 6 mana on this because I can't do anything with it for 4 turns, and I hate it. And then 2 games later, you draw it when you've ramped or something, and you're at like 10 or 12 mana. You're like, I'm going to drop Warstorm Surge and swing an attack with Gyrus and make this giant token and dome somebody for 8. And if nobody responds, next turn I'm going to hit somebody for 10. And I bet there's enough games where it's absolutely fantastic that it offsets the games where it's dead.
Oh, for sure. I think it's a solid card in this type of deck. I think it does more damage over time.
Yeah. I think myself, personally, if this is my deck, I probably don't run it because Man 6 is a lot for me for a card that isn't guaranteed to work. But that's probably more a personal preference than anything.
Yeah, I agree. I think the fact that it's 6 mana, if you're going to either cut this or Death's Presence, I would cut one of them for Doubling Season. I'm sorry. This is the deck for it.
Yeah.
Almost over Parallel Lives. I think I would rather see Doubling Season more than Parallel Lives. Because
I'd probably run both.
Well, yes, you should run both. And the internet's going to crucify me for that statement.
And yes, Doubling Season is $50, and at this right now, and in a month it'd probably be $60 because that's how Doubling Season works. But it's worth it in the decks that want it. It's worth it. It's a great, great card, and it's an expensive card. So
it does, yeah. But Doubling Season in this deck hits both things you want it to hit. It doubles the counters on Gyrus when you cast it, and it also makes 2 tokens. So you're getting that extra bonus just by I'm going to pay 6 for Gyrus. Cool, it's a 12/12.
It's like that Gave Gyrus Force thing where everything Gave does, Doubling Season functions perfectly with it. It's not quite that good, but it's still really good here. 13 sorceries in this deck. What do you think of these, Max?
Oh, let's talk about them. I have thoughts.
Okay.
So we have Blasphemous Act. That's a great board wipe. Typically, it's never going to be 9 mana.
Yep.
Blood for Bones. This was one I had to read because it's from Core Set 2020. It's 4 mana. At additional cost to cast this, sacrifice a creature. Return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then return another creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So 4 mana and a body gets you something back to the battlefield and something to your hand. At sorcery speed, this is, to me, seems very telegraphic. They know you're pretty much telling your opponents what you're going to do.
Yeah, and I think particularly like Rescue from the Underworld costs 1 more mana and it puts both creatures back into play. So you're getting the double ETBs. I think you're spending 1 more mana and there's no 1 mana creatures in this deck. So like you're almost always coming out mana ahead. You're spending 1 more, but because both creatures get in play, you don't have to cast any of them. So like the worst case scenario here is the second creature comes into play and it's a Wood Elves, or I guess the worst thing would be Satyr Wayfinder or Spirit Elder. In that case, you're only saving 1 mana, and with the exception of those 2 creatures, you're saving 2 or 3 or 5. So given all of that, I would much rather just run Rescue from the Underworld and pay the extra mana. It's going to be mana positive more often than not, or excuse me, every single time, and most of the time it's going to net you a lot more mana. So if I wanted the effect, I would go with that one instead.
Yeah.
All right. What else do we have here?
We have Buried Alive. Search your library for up to 3 creature cards and put them into your graveyard. That just makes sense in this deck.
Absolutely.
Chandra's Ignition, another pseudo board wipe, and just an overall great card in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, like you could run Damnation for 1 mana less, and the difference there is Damnation's going to kill everything, but Chandra's Ignition
doesn't kill Gyrus.
Doesn't kill Gyrus, and it's going to hit them for damage. So there's enough times Chandra's Ignition kills somebody. Like I run it in 2 different decks, and it frequently just kills people, let alone the value you get from keeping your biggest creature alive.
Yeah, for sure. Cosmotronic Wave. This was from Guilds of Ravnica. 4 mana, 3 in a red. It deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Creatures your opponents control can't block this turn. I don't like this card in this deck.
I think it does 2 things that are both really good in a limited environment, and they're not good enough I don't think it's good enough in that package for EDH.
I partially agree with you. Yes, it is great in limited. And it is actually really good in EDH if you were in more of a token go wide strategy.
Sure.
Because it hits all of your opponents. So if you have 50 tokens out, who cares if you don't kill anything? You just get through.
I have debated running this in Crash just for like this Toker sweep into like buff Crash up and then be able to swing in. So when I made that statement, I do think it does have decks where it's actually probably a decent card. I just don't know if this is it.
Right. So my suggestion for this is actually a Planeswalker.
Okay.
And it's Angrath, Captain of Chaos. And the reason is his static ability says creatures you control have menace. I don't care that his -2 or 3 or whatever creates an amass token. It's more the fact that giving Gyrus menace means people need blockers. They need bodies. Plus, they need bodies for that token that you're bringing back, if you bring it back. And it's the same amount of mana.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's multiple cards that do this effect, and they do it repeatedly, that I would run over Cosmotronic Wave for sure.
Okay. So we have Cultivate. Everybody knows what that does.
Yep.
Faithless Looting. Everybody knows what that does.
Particularly if you play Modern.
Don't get me started. Farseek. Another gets all your duels that aren't a forest, essentially. Glacial Revelation. This is a new card from Modern Horizons. 2 and a green. Reveal the top 6 cards of your library. You may put any number of snow permanent cards from among them into your hand. Put the rest in your graveyard. Spoiler alert. There are no snow permanents in this deck, unless I missed something.
Nope. So this is a 3 mana, mill yourself 6 to feed Gyrus.
Okay.
I would say this, though. I think that's probably good enough in this deck, given how Gyrus works. I think putting 6 in your graveyard for 3 mana is pretty useful. However, if you're going to run it, why not just run Snowland so you can like put one of them into hand for your land drop next turn? Because there's not much in this deck that cares about lands in your graveyard.
I agree with that, but I think there's still a better card.
What's that?
And this is another card from Modern Horizons. Winding Way. It's 1 and a green. Choose creature or land. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all cards of the chosen type revealed this way into your hand and the rest to your graveyard. So
you choose land to get any lands you want, and the rest go in your graveyard.
Right. I think this is kind of what you want. This is a very creature-heavy deck. So what if you just you can't cast Gyrus for whatever reason, you need something in your hand, you choose creatures, and you're going to hit a good chunk of the time.
Yeah.
Or, like you said, you could choose land knowing that you have at least 2 creatures on top of the board, on top of your deck. It's 1 mana cheaper. You see 2 less cards, but I think the argument could be made that either one is probably good.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
What else we got? So we're wrapping these up. We have Gerard's Orders. Search your library for up to 2 creature cards. Reveal them. Put 1 into your hand and 1 to your graveyard. Then shuffle. So that's just a card selection for 4 mana. Overwhelming Stampede. Just can win the game. Rampant Growth. And then Reap the Past. X red and green. Return X cards at random from your graveyard to your hand. And then exile Reap the Past.
I feel like this deck needs also one. I think Overwhelming Stampede is a good card here. And there's a couple of suggestions I have in the creature spot as well, but I think if you were looking for ways to make your combat damage win more consistently, I think something like Finale of Devastation is going to go get a creature and conceivably double all your creature's power for that kind of final closeout swing, I think is maybe worth a shot here, just for the fact that it gives you another way to win a game. I don't know what I would pull necessarily for it out of here. Maybe that's what you replace with your Death's Presence or something. I'm not sure. But that's a card I would strongly consider here as well. Any more from you?
No, I think this deck could benefit from the rummaging type draws like Tormenting Voice, Cathartic Reunion. He has the Elder Spell in his maybe board. I think that should be good. I know you've had really good luck with that card.
Yeah. Well, that one's probably much more meta dependent to a degree. Like maybe you just don't see Planeswalkers, and if you don't, then I get it.
Yeah. But otherwise, no, I think that's fine.
Creatures. Last but certainly not least, in a deck that seems to be very heavily based around creature combat.
Okay, there's 33 of them, and we're going to go through these somewhat quickly. We'll stop on the more intrinsic ones. So we have Acidic Slime, ETBs, destroy artifact, enchantment, or land. Anger and Brawn, one, if it's in your graveyard, gives all your creatures haste. The other, if it's in your graveyard, gives all your creatures trample. Broodmate Dragon, when it ETBs, put a 4/4 red dragon creature token with flying into play, and it's 3 and Jund, so 6 mana for a 4/4. We have Clamor Shaman. It's a 3 mana 1/1 with Riot, and when it attacks, target creature and opponent controls can't block this turn. We have Combustible Gearhulk. I've mentioned this a few times. For those who don't know, it's 6 mana, 4 red, for an artifact creature construct. It's a 6/6 with first strike. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If that player doesn't, mill the top 3 cards of your library, and they take damage. And Combustible Gearhulk deals damage equal to those cards' combined CMC. Corpsejack Menace, double all the +1/+1 counters. Disciple of Bolus, ETBs, sacrifice a creature, gain X life, draw X cards, where X was the sacrifice creature's power. Duplicant, ETB, imprint, exile whatever gets imprinted, and it becomes that's power and toughness of whatever you exiled with it. Eternal Witness, one of the best cards that start with the letter E. It's a 2/1 that brings something back to your hand. Evolution Sage, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. Farhaven Elf, when it enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library. Gigantomancer, it's 7 and a green for a 1/1, but it has the activate ability for 1 generic mana. Target creature you control becomes 7/7 until end of turn. And I'm pretty sure that is just base power 7/7, right?
Yep.
Okay. God Eternal Ronus, enters the battlefield, double the power of each creature you control until end of turn, and they gain vigilance. And then if it were to die or is put into exile from the battlefield, you may put it into its owner's library 3rd from the top. So that clause can be kind of worked around, unlike some of the Eldrazi Titans, where you can still get it into your graveyard and get it to stay there if you want. Hornet Queen, 7 mana, flying, death touch, ETBs, makes 4 1/1 insects with flying and death touch. Ilharg, when it attacks, put a creature from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Return it at the beginning of the next end step. Ingot Chewer, it ETBs, destroy target artifact. It also has Evoke. It's a 3/3. Master of Cruelties, one of Chris's favorite Alesha tricks, whenever it deals combat damage to a player and isn't blocked, that player's life total becomes 1. It also has first strike, I believe. Yep, and death touch. Fun stuff. Merciless Executioner, ETBs, each player sacrifices a creature. Nessian Wild Ravager. This is a 6 mana Hydra with Tribute 6. Tribute is when this creature enters the battlefield, an opponent of your choice may place 6 +1/+1 counters on it. And then if its tribute wasn't paid, you may have it fight another creature. Orcan Assassin, this is from Guilds of Ravnica, I believe.
Yep.
It has Death Touch. It's a 1/1, but all creatures able to block must do so. So that's a cool little diversion.
Yeah.
Plague Crafter, similar to Merciless Executioner, it ETBs. Each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Each player who can't discards a card. Protean Hulk, well, that's interesting. When it is put into a grave, when Protean Hulk dies, search your library for any number of creature cards with converted mana cost 6 or less, and put them onto the battlefield. And then shuffle your library. I feel like I skipped a word there. With total command cost. I was looking for combined for some reason.
With total, yeah.
Ravenous Chupacabra, just another ETB sacrifice stuff card. Rayhan, Last of the Abzan, it's the partner commander from a few years back. It enters with 3 +1/+1 counters, and then whenever a creature you control dies or is put into the command zone, if it had 1 or more +1/+1 counters on it, you may put that many 1/1 counters on target creature. So this is a great way, if Gyrus were to die, move the counters.
Yep.
Or even if he were to die, move the counters. Sakura Tribe Elder, sacrifice, get a land. Satyr Wayfinder enters the battlefield. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put a land card from among them into your hand. Put the rest in your graveyard. A great way to get creatures into the yard. Thorn of the Black Rose. It's a 1/3 Death Toucher, and when it ETBs, you become the Monarch. Underrealm Lich, 5 mana for the pseudo Sylvan Library-esque effect. Whenever you were to draw, if you were to draw a card, instead look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put 1 into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. And you can pay 4 life, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. The bane of my existence, Whip-Tongue Hydra. ETBs, destroy all creatures with flying, and then put that many +1/+1, put a +1/+1 counter on Whip-Tongue Hydra for each creature destroyed this way. And then wrapping up the creatures, we have Wood Elves. ETBs, look for a forest, not a basic forest, any forest, and put that card into play untapped, shuffle your library. World Shaper, whenever it attacks, mill the top 3 cards of your library, and when it dies, put all lands from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. Finally, we have Yavimaya Elder. When it dies, you may search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal them, put them in your hand, and shuffle your library. And then you can also pay 2 to sacrifice it to draw a card. That's a lot of creatures, and a lot of small creatures would be the words I'd use.
And a lot of ETBs that do things, or at least attack triggers or interaction. There's not a lot of things here that aren't working with the deck in some way, but there's still a few things I would haircut off here.
Yeah, for sure.
For example, I don't know if Clamor Shaman is effective enough. It's got Riot, so it can come into play as a 2/2 or with haste, but when it attacks, a creature can't block.
So can I stop you right there, Dana?
Sure.
I want to quickly touch on any of the creatures that say when it attacks. They're great when they get cast, because you actually get that attack trigger.
But
when you make the token copy of them with Gyrus, you don't get that attack trigger. So
right.
No matter how good Ilharg is, if it's in your yard and you have to bring it back with Gyrus, you don't get to put something else into play.
Right. And I think Ilharg is maybe good enough because of the ability. Maybe that's enough. But I don't think. But Clamor Shaman isn't.
I don't think it is. Not in this build. I mean, what do you want to bring in with Ilharg? Besides what, Hornet Queen?
Sure. Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point.
I mean, God Eternal Ronus, I guess. You can keep bouncing that.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, there's enough stuff, Evolution Sage maybe, or there's like a lot of ETBs here that are relatively efficiently costed. I do think Ilharg is maybe enough, but a lot of them aren't. Clamor Shaman isn't. Definitely, if that isn't going to work, well, and it doesn't work when Gyrus attacks, that's not good enough to have that card for what it does.
Right.
And there's a couple of those in these lists. I don't think Nessian Wild's Ravager, I guess, maybe is because it's a fight effect. Because on the battlefield, so maybe that's enough. But there's some of these. There's a couple of these here that I just don't think. Yavimaya Elder is kind of a neat card, but is, even if it's the token. Okay, so the token comes into play. 2 mana to sacrifice it to draw a card, and put a few lands in your hand. That's, I guess, good. But is that the kind of move you want to be making when Gyrus is attacking? I don't think it is.
For 1 more mana, why not just run Solemn Simulacrum? Because you're going to get that land onto the battlefield no matter what. If you draw that card off that token, who cares?
I guess the thought is Yavimaya Elder can sacrifice itself, whereas you're just going to get exiled off of Solemn unless you have a sack outlet. But even Solemn, I just don't know if either of those 2 things are good enough, considering the really good things you could be doing with this deck.
100% agree.
So, and I think 33 creatures is a good amount, but I think you could easily replace a couple of these creatures with removal spells or with draw spells. I think, like you mentioned, a few of the impulse draw red draw spell cards that force you to, or excuse me, the looting effects where you draw, 2, discard 2, kind of like the Faithless Looting variants. I think I would much rather have a Faithless Looting variant that's going to get me cards in hand and let me sculpt my graveyard than I would that Yavimaya Elder or that that Clamor Shaman. Like, I'd rather have that spell that does that perfect thing than hope that Clamor Shaman does something useful or hope the my Elder does something useful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, we actually, this is our second Gyrus decks you've played.
Yeah.
My roommate actually has a Gyrus deck. He was our first one, Austin.
Yep.
The way I took that deck, and then it took about 3 weeks after that episode to actually tune the deck, I just went for ETB Value Town, and maybe that's not what everybody wants to play, but literally just shoring up his mana base and finding the creatures that did more than just get you a land when it enters the battlefield or destroys an artifact has made that deck go from he sits there and doesn't do anything for the first 5 turns of the game to where you kind of have to watch him come turn 3. I mean, you know how that deck plays now, Dana. He's a threat right off the gate.
Yep. And I think that's because he's in that deck, he's gone from a build where there were half a dozen creatures that if he cast them, nobody cared, to a build where everything in that deck makes you go, ugh. Like, everything in that deck is now impactful in a way that changes the board state or causes a problem for somebody or builds you resources or gives you something useful. And I think there's enough things in here that I would shave off and replace with cards that are always doing a thing consistently every time it's advancing my game plan. So, are there any creatures that you would like to add here? We've mentioned a few that we would take out. Are there any ones that jump out at you that you'd like to see in the deck?
So like he already has Combustible Gearhulk in here. The other 2 Gearhulks are pretty dang good. The Noxious Gearhulk destroys something and gains you life, destroys a target creature and gains you life. It also has Menace, another way to chip in that 5 or 6 damage. The green Gearhulk distributes 4+1/+1 counters among any number of creatures you control. So, it's a 5 mana 4/4, but that's 4 extra power you're putting on Gyrus.
Yeah.
When you hard cast it, that's 4 more power you're putting on it when you reanimate it. I also like bringing in like the black Primordial from Gatecrash that lets you bring cards out of everybody's graveyard.
That card is so good.
And I also like Sidisi Undead Vizier. You cast it, you exploit something, you tutor a card, and then you can reanimate it, exploit itself, and tutor a card.
Yeah.
I also think, if Gyrus is kind of a way to win the game, you need some +1/+1 counter synergies in your creatures. So something like Coiling Oracle, anything like that would be really good in this deck because you can add 1 extra counter onto Gyrus. And that 1 counter might just do it.
Yeah, that might be enough to put you... Sometimes it's enough to put you over the top to actually win a game. I know he already has Merciless Executioner in here and Plaguecrafter, and I know it's a really heavily played card, but there's a reason Fleshbag Marauder is played so much in these kind of decks. That effect is so strong in Gyrus because basically the token that is going to be exiled end of turn dies anyway to your Fleshbag Marauder, to the trigger, but like that's just sculpting the board every time it comes out. I don't like seeing someone Gyrus up an Executioner or a Plaguecrafter, and why not have a third way to do that in your deck? There's just so much value in doing that here. I would be really tempted to find a slot for that as well.
Yeah. If you want to get a little more fancy, you could add something like Strionic Resonator to this deck to copy Gyrus's trigger. Gyrus is such a versatile commander because you can do tons of stuff. You can do Hydra Tribal, you can do ETB Value Town. You can just go, 60 some creatures and see what happens. That could be fun. I don't know how good it'll be, but it could be fun.
And you even have the option if you want to try some shenanigans to do like some end of turn stuff when the trigger's in the stack to keep that token around.
Yeah.
With Sundial of the Infinite or something. So like that is an option in a deck too if you want to try to go that route. So yeah, I think this deck, in general, the biggest problem I would say is it needs to focus a little bit more on what it wants to do. There's not quite enough sack outlets for doing that. There's not quite enough +1 counter synergy if that's what the plan is. There's, I think, maybe a few too many sub-themes happening, and I would like to see him drill down a little bit into a couple of those and maybe drop one and just go harder into the other ones. Does that make sense to you?
No, yeah, I completely agree. That's kind of, we've talked about this in the past, and it was probably like 50 plus episodes ago at this point, but like, when you build an EDH deck, you need to have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and maybe even a plan D, and you need to be able to, justify like, okay, if plan A doesn't work, what is my plan B? And I don't think there's a clear plan. There's not a clear plan B in this deck, or even a clear plan C. It's just, cool, let's do this and see what happens.
Well, or if the plans are there, at least there's not enough cards to consistently execute them. So, but I'm a fan of Gyrus. I like what he's doing. I think this deck just needs a little more tweaking. I think if you lean into a couple of those suggestions we've made, it's going to function a lot smoother, I would think. So that is going to wrap up day 2 of Vegas week, the first deck tech of the week. We'll have a couple more of these coming down the road. And thank you very much, Cable Beck, for your support on Patreon and for letting us look at your deck. We appreciate it. It means a lot to us, and it helps keep the lights on, even though we're currently not there in the Dungeon of Doom. We're in Vegas, getting ready to go. It keeps the lights on for Max's roommate currently.
Hey, Chris has a key to the Dungeon of the Doom.
That's true.
He might be doing things while we're gone.
That's true.
That's very scary now that I think about it. He doesn't know how to turn the computer on. It's fine.
All right, we're good to go. We'll be back tomorrow with another deck tech. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty with Kevin MacLeod. Our show is edited by Ken Peddle. You can find him on Twitter at LOAD3R. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max on Twitter at CMDR_Max. And you can find Chris on Twitter at YSquishy1. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow. I'm Dana.
I'm Max, and you can find me at the IV station in my hotel lobby.
Peace out, GP Vegas.